They seem confident, yet you realize they dictated every topic, interrupted every challenge, and commanded all the attention. How did they do it without raising their voice? This is the dark psychological paradox of conversational dominance, a calculated seizure of the narrative flow.
You know this feeling, right? You walk away from a chat feeling just drained, unheard, a little confused even. But there was no yelling, there wasn't an argument, and yet you have this gut feeling that the whole thing was completely steered by just one person. Well, today we're going to deconstruct that exact feeling. We are pulling back the curtain on this sneaky kind of control to show you the blueprint, the psychology behind it, and most importantly, how to defend yourself.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to expose this silent takeover for what it is. Then, we'll decode the weapon they're using. After that, we'll walk through the manipulator's three-stage process, dive into the psychological tug-of-war that's happening, and then we'll get to the good stuff, building a defensive playbook so you can take back your own reality.
So let's get right to the heart of the problem. This isn't about who's the loudest. It's so much more subtle than that. The real power play is hijacking the very bones of the conversation itself. Who gets to talk, what you get to talk about, the entire rhythm. It's a takeover that happens so quietly you don't even realize you've lost control until you're walking away wondering, wait, what just happened?
Look, to fight a tactic, you have to be able to name it. You've got to see it clearly. And this isn't just someone being a bad listener or, a bit of a motor mouth. No, this is a deliberate, systematic pattern. And understanding what it's actually called is the very first step to taking away its power.
So here it is, our key definition, conversational dominance. Now look at those words on the screen, systematic and unilaterally. This is not an accident, it's a strategy. It's often a go-to tactic for people who need constant outside approval to feel okay about themselves, something psychologists call narcissistic supply. A good way to think of it is like their ego is a car with a dead battery. It can't generate its own power, so it constantly needs a jump from other people's attention. For them, controlling the conversation isn't about sharing ideas, it's about getting that jumpstart from you.
So let's break down their toolkit. First up, topic hijacking. This is their signature move. You could be talking about your vacation, and they'll jump in with, "Oh, that reminds me of my trip too," and suddenly the spotlight is on them. Next, interrupting and overlapping. This isn't just excitement, it's a power move. It sends a clear signal that your thoughts aren't worth finishing. Then there's question bombing. This is where they hit you with a string of questions, not because they're curious, but to keep you on the defensive. It's like a boxer throwing quick jabs so you can never plant your feet and throw a punch back. And finally, paralinguistic control. This is the subtle stuff, using a slightly louder tone, a slower pace, all designed to make them sound like the authority in the room. Okay, so we've identified the weapons. Now let's see how they're actually deployed. Because this isn't random, it follows a very predictable three-stage pattern. It's a process, and once you see the mechanism, you can start to dismantle it.
This is the blueprint right here. It all starts with a seizure of the floor. Then they move into a relentless maintenance of their story, and it ends with your isolation and ultimately your compliance. Let's dig into each of these stages.
Stage 1 is the initial power grab. They'll use that commanding tone or abruptly hijack the topic to become the center of attention. This actually exploits a little shortcut in our brains called the authority principle. We are basically wired to listen to the person who seems to be in charge. The dominator creates this illusion of authority, and we, without even thinking, just hand them the microphone. Okay, so once they have the microphone, they enter stage 2, maintenance. Think of their story as a fortress that they have to defend. Anytime you try to introduce a new idea or share a different perspective, it's like an attack on their walls. And bam, they deploy their defenses. They'll interrupt you, hit you with those question bombs, or just hijack the topic right back. The unspoken rule becomes crystal clear. This conversation is about them and only them. And all of this leads to the final stage, isolation. I mean, after being constantly interrupted and redirected, you just get tired. It's exhausting. Fighting for your turn to speak feels like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. So eventually, it feels easier to just stop, to go silent. And for the manipulator, that silence is the trophy. Your quiet compliance is the supply we talked about. It's the validation they were after all along. So we've covered the how. Now let's get into the why. What is really going on inside the head of the manipulator and what's going on inside yours? Because this really is a psychological battle, and it's driven by completely opposite needs. This slide lays it out perfectly. On the manipulator's side, it's all about something called ego regulation. Basically, their sense of self is shaky, and it needs constant propping up from the outside world. But on your side, your vulnerability often comes from two very normal human traits: a desire to avoid conflict and something called cognitive load. Our brains are designed to be efficient. They like the path of least resistance. And let's be honest, fighting for every single word in a conversation is draining. So the manipulator's desperate need for attention perfectly exploits our natural desire for peace and quiet.
Okay, we've done enough analysis. Now it's time to shift from understanding the problem to empowering you with the solution. This is your defensive playbook. These are real, practical things you can do to spot this behavior and take back your space in any conversation.
The very first defensive move is just awareness. You have to see it objectively. So start by mentally tracking the conversational ratio. In a normal chat, it's kind of balanced, right? But in one of these situations, it's going to look exactly like this chart. One person is eating up 80, maybe even 90% of the airtime. The second you go from a feeling, I feel like I'm being ignored, to a piece of data, wow, that person has been talking for 15 of the last 20 minutes, you've already started to take your power back. It's a huge red flag that you're not in a conversation, you're in an audience.
So, once you see the imbalance, you need a tool. This is the fact anchor technique. It's 3 simple steps. First, use a calm physical signal. Just raise your hand a bit, not aggressively, more like a pause button. Second, you have to interrupt the interrupter. I know it feels rude, but it's necessary. And third, you redirect to solid ground. You say something like, "Hang on, let's just finish the facts on the budget first." You anchor the conversation to something objective. This works because it's way harder for them to argue with a fact than it is to dismiss an opinion. You're dragging them back to neutral territory.
And you know, maybe the most powerful tool of all is just a simple sentence, stating a boundary, calmly and clearly, saying, "I'm going to finish my point," or "Please let me finish." You're not being rude, you're just asking for basic conversational respect. This is so effective because you are naming the behavior out loud and you're drawing a line. You say it without anger, just with the calm energy of a brick wall. It short-circuits their control because it shows them you refuse to be a passive audience member in their one-person show.
So how do we pull all of this together and actually reclaim our own reality? Well, it all comes down to the power of awareness. Because as soon as you can see the pattern, the manipulator's greatest weapon, the fact that their technique is invisible, just disappears.
Let's recap. It all starts when you realize that topic hijacking and constant interruptions aren't just bad manners. They are tactical moves designed to seize control of the entire narrative. When you see that, the game changes. And now you know the motive. This control isn't for the sake of the conversation. It's just the mechanism they use to extract what they need from you: your attention, your agreement, your silence. It's not about connecting, it's about taking. But this is the most important part. Your awareness completely breaks their system. The moment you recognize what they're doing and calmly assert your right to speak, you cut off their supply. You break the loop. So this is the whole thing in a nutshell. Conversational dominance is the sneaky way manipulators control the entire room. They use topic hijacking and overlapping to secure narrative control. Why? For supply extraction. But your awareness flips the script. By simply paying attention to the speaking ratio, by using a tool like the fact anchor, you refuse to give up your space. You break their dominance. Because the one controlling the conversation is controlling the reality, and that person can and should be you.
This isn't just some interesting psychological theory. The power is now in your hands. So the real question is, now that you see the pattern, how will you reclaim your conversational space?